Chapter 22. A Glimpse of the Occult World. In the preceding chapter, I have asked you to form a mental picture of the ocean of mind power. Let us now proceed to examine this picture in detail. Let us observe the activities and manifestations that present themselves. In considering this magic mental picture, I must imagine that you are a highly developed occultist, and that consequently you are able to see on what occultists call the second plane. Without going into the subject in detail here, for it forms no part of this present work, I will say that occultists recognize 7 planes of life, all of which have their own laws and phenomena. The first plane is our ordinary material plane, the phenomena of which may be observed by all having their physical senses. This first plane is the plane of matter, and all of its phenomena is that of matter. All that can be seen on that plane is the movement or presence of matter. Even when we say that we see the manifestation of some force on this plane, we really mean that we see that force as it produces a movement or change in matter. We do not see the force at all. All that we see is the matter moved by the force. The second plane is the plane of forces, on which operate energy or force in all of its forms. Occultists who have reached the second degree of unfoldment are able to sense the phenomena on this second plane. That is, they are able to witness the phenomena of the forces on their own plane and independent of the presence of matter. To illustrate this, I would say that on the first plane, the plane of the majority of the race, the phenomena attaching to electricity can be sensed only through the agency of the matter in which the electricity operates. You can see material objects moved by electricity, but you cannot see the electricity itself. The same is true of magnetism. You may see the needle drawn to the magnet, but you cannot see the current of magnetic vibrations themselves. You cannot see the vibratory light waves, but you can see the manifestation of light when these waves strike upon a material object. But, on the second plane, those who have attained the second degree report that the vibratory waves of electricity, magnetism, light, heat, etc., are capable of being sensed by them without the presence of the material vehicle. They report that they are able to see the vibrations themselves. For instance, they can see the waves of electricity or magnetism as they pass through the ether and before they reach the material objects which they affect in a way visible to the ordinary eye. They report that even the vibratory waves of the X-ray are visible to them, without the agency of the fluorescent screen used by scientific men before the X-rays become apparent to them. You know, of course, that these X-rays, and in fact also the higher rays of ordinary light, are invisible to the human eye, although capable of being recorded by instruments, photographic plates, etc. In these second plane, people report that the vibrations of the mind power waves, or currents, are plainly perceptible to them. But remember, they do not see mind itself. They see merely the waves of energy emanating from mind. The remaining 5 planes, that is the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh planes, respectively, are subjects that belong to the higher degrees of occultism and form no part of the subject of this book. I merely mention them so that advanced students may recognize that I am aware of their existence and importance, and am not misled by any erroneous belief in there being only 2 planes. These chapters belong to the second plane teachings, and do not deal with the third plane or those still higher. They deal with the energy phase of mind, that is mind in its aspect of mind power. Someday I may write of the higher planes, but not now. So, to return to our mind power picture, I will assume that you are able to sense the second plane phenomena, and thus actually see the passage and existence of the mentative waves and currents. By giving you the teachings in this way, I will be able to picture the phenomena much clearer than if I held to the first plane method. I want to show you the forces themselves, as well as their effect upon material forms. The first thing that you will see in our mind power picture is the presence of great clouds of vapory substance, somewhat resembling the fleecy clouds of a summer day, although some of the clouds are much heavier and darker looking. And you will note the presence of color in these clouds, some of them being a dull gray, and others being tinted like the clouds at sunset or sunrise. It is a beautiful sight, this ever-changing mass of colored clouds of all kinds, shapes, forms, and degrees of density. Let us consider just what these various colors mean, for each has its own meaning, the color being dependent upon the degree of vibration and the degree of vibration depending upon the feeling which started the waves into motion. I had not intended to mention this in these chapters, but I now see that I cannot omit it without causing a loss to my students. When one gets talking about second-plane phenomena, it is hard to refrain from telling the story through to the finish. Let me give you the emotional colors, that you may recognize them as you see them in the picture. Here they are. Blue is the vibrational color pertaining to spiritual feeling and represents the various religious feelings and emotions, the shade growing lighter as the religious concept rises toward true spirituality. Light blue represents a high, unselfish, spiritual feeling, a beautiful violet representing the highest religious feeling, and a peculiar shade which may be called ultraviolet, representing a spiritual unfoldment of a very high order. Yellow is the vibrational color pertaining to the feelings and emotions associated with intellectual power, the shade growing clearer as the intellect mounts to higher conceptions. A dull, dark yellow is the color of the ordinary intellectual state, while the brilliant intellect shows itself in a beautiful golden hue. There is a shade still higher than this, although most rare among the race. I allude to that shade of true primary yellow, which belongs to those who have attained a high degree of true occult unfoldment, the spiritually illumined. The highest occult teachings inform us that the vibrational shade belonging to spirit, or the essence of being, is a pure white light of an unusual brilliancy. Orange, which is a combination of yellow and red, pertains to those possessing the pride of intellectuality or intellectual ambition of a marked degree. Brown is the vibrational color of avarice and greed. Red is the vibrational color of passion in all of its phases. Dull, deep red betokens the animal passions and sensuality. A dark, bright red betokens anger and hate. When mingled with black, it is anger or hate arising from malice or envy. When mingled with green, it relates to anger from jealousy or envy. When shown without the mingling color, it denotes fight for some supposed right or ordinary cause. When this color is seen in the shade of crimson, it betokens a higher form of love, the shade becoming lighter and clearer as the degree of the feeling advances in the scale of character. A gross, selfish love shows as a dull crimson, while a higher form of love displays a clearer shade, terminating in a shade approaching a soft rose color when the character of the attachment is on a high plane. Green is a peculiar vibrational color and betokens a number of odd phases of feeling and emotion. A peculiar dull dirty green betokens jealousy or envy. A grayish green indicates deceit, which shade becomes clearer and brighter as the quality of the deceit rises in the scale. A bright clear shade of green is seen when there is a manifestation of tact, diplomacy, politeness, adaptability, etc., etc. Gray is a negative vibrational color, which in its dark shades indicates gloom, depression, or melancholy, etc., and in a bright clear shade indicates selfishness, and in a certain pallid shade indicates fear or terror. Black is the vibrational color of hate, malice, revenge, and similar states of feeling. These vibrational emotional colors, of course, combine and blend into each other in countless combinations, but the above will give you a key to the same. The vibrational colors of the two mental poles can scarcely be called colors at all, for their colors and shades are derived from the character of the feeling inspiring them, which gives to them the degree of vibration and color indicating the motive or emotive impulse. But there may be seen a difference even in these two. That is, the emotive pole, in its currents of desire force, shows a scintillating effect, as if there were a multitude of minute sparks or stars in the current. And the motive pole, in its currents of willpower, shows an effect something like a multitude of tiny and minute lightning flashes playing in the stream or current. In addition to the shades mentioned above, there is another that should be mentioned while we are considering the subject. I allude to what might be called the vitality vibrations, which radiate from the living body, and which are caused by the vital force which permeates the body during life and makes possible the running of the physical machinery. Some prefer to call it nerve force. These vibrations show no special color, although when near, or in the body, they manifest a faint reddish tint. But when seen away from the body, they show a lack of color, like clear water, and resemble the heated air arising from a stove, lamp, or heated ground. That is to say, they look like a colorless, vibrating body of air. The degree and strength of these vibrations depend upon the state of physical health of the person manifesting them. Now, as we gaze upon our mind power picture and see moving thereon the shapes and forms of human beings, we may see that each being is surrounded with an aura or egg-shaped atmosphere of these emotional vibrations, radiations emanated from his mental states. This aura extends out from the body for a distance of about 1 yard, and gradually fades away as the distance from the body is increased. And the aura of each person is seen to be colored according to the vibrations belonging to his prevailing mental states. Each mental state shows itself in its appropriate shade, in the proper combinations, blendings, etc., and therefore, the trained occultist is able to read a person's character like an open book from these emotional colors. And even though one may not be manifesting any special mental state at the moment, his aura will still be colored because of his prevailing mental state, his character, as it were. And of course, these vibrations composing the aura of a person will affect those coming in contact with or near him or her. That is the reason why we feel the personal atmosphere of people when we come near them. Even beyond the visible aura, the vibrations continue in a fainter degree. And so, on our picture, we can tell just what kind of people are passing before us. Their mental states are revealed by the emotional colors. And now we shall see how people affect others. We see one man approach another. The degree of dynamic positivity of the first man is superior to that of the second, and we see, as we watch, that the coloring of his aura gradually interpenetrates that of the weaker man, and the coloring of the latter's aura gradually grows to more closely resemble that of the first man. We may watch the process, and thus become aware that the following things are happening, viz. The mental states of the first man are inducing similar feelings and emotions in the second man, by means of the currents of mentative energy that are flowing toward him. The first man is making no effort to impress the second man, but being the more positive, his magnetism affects that of the other man and induces similar states. The second man takes on the states of the first man, as we may see by the change in coloring. This is the way that people unconsciously affect other people, and the latter are unconsciously affected. Simply a case of unconscious mentative induction, you see. The second man moves on, feeling more depressed or elated, as the case may be, by reason of his contact with the first man, and also carrying away with him a little of the other man's general feelings and character. This second man, a little later on, meets another man, and we may see how this new man affects the second man by the suggestion of his manner and words. He does not seem to be sending out such strong currents as the man first spoken of, but his outward symbols of voice, words, manner, etc., are well acted out, and we soon see our second man having mental states induced in him by suggestion. You have now seen 2 stages or phases of mentative induction. Our positive man has gone on his way, and soon he spies another man whom he wishes to influence in certain matters. Watch him now, and you will see something interesting. The positive man's aura seems to be disturbed, and great tongues of color seem to leap from it and lap around the other man, the whole process resembling the action of tongues of flame or fire. These tongues of mind power wrap themselves all around one other man, and some seem to scintillate as they manifest the action of fairly pulling him toward the positive man, while others seem to be beating upon him like a rain of tiny flashes of lightning. The one is the play of desire force, and the other the action of willpower. This gives us a good illustration of personal influence in an interview, or a phase of personal magnetism. As the action grows more spirited, you may see the willpower of the positive man darting out in straight, sharp flashes, like great sparks from an electric battery, and you may see the process by which he beats down and neutralizes the willpower of the weaker man, until he seems to exhaust it and take it captive, and the man acquiesces in the statements and demands of the stronger-willed man. This process is hastened by the fact that the desire force of the weaker man has become so impressed by the stronger will that it becomes dazed or fascinated. The effect being strongly increased by the desire force of the stronger man by setting up mentative induction, a corresponding vibration in the desire pole of the weaker man. And a fourth element in the attack is that the strong desire force of the strong man also tends to pull the will of the weaker one toward it and away from its natural mate, its own desire pole. This is a case of a combined, determined attack. It is true that the positive man may not know a single fact regarding mind power, but he has learned the process of affecting and influencing others and bending them to his will and desire, although he is ignorant of the scientific explanation of the process. Every positive dynamic individual understands this, instinctively, and his knowledge increases as practice gives him more confidence in himself. These people pass from the scene, and we may see in their place men and women, charming, alluring, and drawing others by reason of their desire force operating along the lines of so-called love, but which is but little more than selfish animal passion, in some cases grosser than that manifested by the animals, because it is abnormal in its manifestations and inordinate in its demands. We see much of this in our picture, but we notice here and there that some people seem able to repel these attractions easily and are not affected by the currents of desire. Their general mental state is so different that great resistance is interposed, and the attacking current is deflected and defeated, even without the use of a great effort of the will. You see many instances of this in all forms of mentative influence, like attracts like in this mentative work, and those who are attracted are generally those whose mental states correspond to a great extent with those of the person affecting them. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule, owing to ignorance and lack of experience, coupled with confidence and trust, but the rule is true in general. Passing before you in the picture, you see preachers influencing their congregations. You see the great currents of mentative energy rolling over the hall or church. The congregations being in a receptive and passive attitude, with wills relaxed, they actually draw out the force of the preacher. You may judge just what grade of religious feeling the preacher is pouring out by examining the shade of his blue emotional color. You will be apt to see a better shade among the poorer churches and denominations, and a very repulsive dark purplish blue among the fashionable churches as a rule. You will notice also the waves and currents arising from the congregation, which establishes the atmosphere of the church, and which will be immediately felt by a stranger entering its doors. You will see similar things at the theaters and political meetings and all gatherings of people, the color always giving you the key to the character of the meeting and the people attending it. Next, you see the hypnotist and his subject in a public hall. You will notice that the hypnotist's emotional color is not attractive. You will notice the neutral gray color of the aura of the subject, who seems to have squeezed every bit of his own mental states out of him. He is a professional subject and is a slave of the professor. You will see the hypnotist's magnetism pouring into the subject and filling his mind completely. You will see how the will of the hypnotist supplants the will of the subject and dominates him absolutely. You will notice that both the desire pole and the will pole of the subject seem to show no energy of their own, but are moved entirely by the personality and mind of the operator. This is an extreme case, of course, but it better illustrates the phenomenon, and, by its effect upon the audience, you may determine just how far advanced mentally they are, the color giving you the cue. Of course, mental suggestion is playing its part in all of these cases, but we cannot see that, because it is not a current or wave, but is merely the operation of outward symbols in the direction of inducing mental states in others. We may see the induced mental states, but can learn the nature of the suggestion only by watching and listening at what is said and done. I am mentioning only a few of the many cases that you are witnessing in the picture, but these few cases will illustrate the different phases of the principle and operation of the force. But all of these cases have given you merely an illustration of telementation at short range. Now let us proceed to examine the instances of the operation of the same force at long range, in all of its many and wonderful phases. Before doing so, however, let us take a quick look at the mental atmospheres of the towns, cities, and villages, as well as of the buildings, localities, etc., passing before us on the picture. This is most interesting and instructive. In the first place, you will notice the great clouds of mentative energy permeating every place and every corner, each showing its own shade of vibrational color, indicating the vibrations arising from the prevalence of certain mental states. I have spoken of the causes of this in a previous chapter and shall not repeat the details here. You will remember that I have explained to you how the various currents of mentative energy of all kinds and degrees come in contact with each other and often blend, combine, or else act in the direction of neutralizing each other's force. Currents of a similar degree of vibration harmonize and form combinations or blendings. Opposing vibrations and currents tend to antagonize each other and neutralize each other's force. In this way are the mental atmospheres of places formed. You may see them in the picture, but, you may ask, why do these clouds persist after the person has sent them forth? The answer is that force once set into motion persists for a greater or lesser time, depending upon the intensity of the original impulse. Just as the light of a star, or rather, its light waves, exist and move on centuries after the star has ceased to be. Just as the heat vibrations continue in a room when the producing cause has been removed. Just as odors remain when the cause moves away. So do the mentative vibrations and their corresponding thought forms continue long after the original feeling has passed away. Yes, for years afterwards, in some cases. In this way, places, houses, stores, etc., maintain atmospheres imparted by the vibrations of people long since moved away or passed away. Stores are unlucky because of the negative mental states of some people who have occupied them. Houses are haunted by reason of the vibrations arising from intense desire or feelings, or horror and fear of someone participating in a crime, either as criminal or victim. The atmospheres of prisons are quite noticeable even to the ordinary visitor, who feels the vibrations with which the place is saturated. The atmosphere of places of low pleasures is equally noticeable. I know of a place of this kind in which the vibrations continued for years after the original tenants had departed and the building had been used for business purposes. Hospitals have a very depressing influence upon the majority of people. Of course, these negative effects can be removed by mentally treating the place or room and sending forth streams of mentative energy of a positive, stimulating character. On the other hand, the presence of an active, energetic, successful man or set of men in a place will permeate the place with positive vibrations that will stimulate all who abide there. I have in mind a certain large office building in a large city, which is filled with these vibrations, originally arising from a few leading men who built and occupied it, and then attracted to themselves others of the same kind, the result being that the combined influence now renders the place an inspiration for those having offices in it. I have heard people say that after moving in that building their business doubled itself, and their energy increased in the same proportion. There is a law underlying these things, and if people understood it, they would take advantage of its positive sides and avoid its negative phases. I think that I have given you a good strong hint in this direction. These great clouds of vapory manifested mind power often constitute what are called thought forms, which I shall proceed to describe to you. Follow my explanations of these things as they appear on the picture, please. These thought forms are really feeling forms, remember, although I use the more familiar term. These thought forms, although all generated or created in the same manner, differ very materially in their characteristics and details. Let us consider some of these details and characteristics and appearances. By appearances, I mean, of course, their appearance to those who can sense on the second plane. But whether one can so sense or not, the effect of these thought forms manifest upon them just the same. It is not necessary to see a thing in order to feel its influence. But you understand this, of course, from what has been said already. The most common form is that of a series of undulating waves, or ripples of a vapory cloud-like substance, passing out from the mind of the person experiencing the mental state originating them, the waves manifesting a ring-like form, moving out in every direction from the common center, just as do the rings caused by a stone having been dropped into a pond. The distance traveled and the rate of speed manifested depends upon the intensity of the emotional impulse. The speed diminishes according to the distance traveled, but long after the actual motion seems to have ceased, there exists an almost imperceptible motion that causes the outer wave to drift on in a lazy, listless manner. Another variety of thought forms manifest like a volume of smoke being blown from the lips of a cigar smoker. Such forms pour out in long streams, then spread out and broaden, although maintaining the direction originally imparted to them. This form arises when the mental state arises directly in connection with some other person or thing, and when the attention of the mentator is centered, consciously or unconsciously, upon that person or thing. In this case, the motion of the thought form is in the direction of the person or thing being directly considered by the mentator. Akin to this form is a series of forms resembling a puffing forth of smoke from a huge smokestack, great puffs of mentative thought forms being sent out in a certain direction, as the jerky repeated mentative impulses are originated and manifested in the mind of the mentator. Other kinds of thought forms pour forth steadily, but lazily, in the direction of the object thought of. Others, still, are ejected in all directions from the mentator, like the steam escaping from the lid of a tea kettle which is being lifted by the force of the steam within. Still another form appears like a streak of light flashing from a mirror held in the sun. Certain particular forms of willpower manifest as vivid lightning flashes. Other forms travel and seem to enfold the object thought of, and which, being impelled by the strong desire of the mentator, act as if they were trying to draw back to him the objects desired. In fact, that is exactly the nature of the action of this class of thought forms, the effect produced depending, of course, upon the positiveness of the mentator and the strength of the desire. The effect, of course, also is materially influenced by the degree of positiveness of the person affected, and other attractions which prevent the yielding to the pull of desire force. In the case of a strong desire on the part of the mentator, provided that the ruling passion is being manifested day after day, there appears a combination of thought forms which resembles a huge octopus of dense structure, with enormous vapory tentacles or arms reaching out in all directions, seeking the thing desired, and endeavoring to draw it back to its center. In the case of a high aspiration, backed by a strong and active will, this combination will appear tinted with a color and shade of vibrational color corresponding with the character of the mental state, while, in the case of a low character of desire, the darker colors will likewise manifest themselves. Still another kind of thought form acts as if it were trying to push back the object in some particular direction, while others seem to hold back the object. In both of these cases, the action and direction of the thought form depends upon the nature and character of the desire or will of the mentator at the time of the conception of the mentative current. A most peculiar kind of thought form appears when the mentator is desirous of obtaining information regarding some certain subject, and is earnestly sending his desire force in all directions in order to draw it to him, the mentator generally being unconscious or at least in ignorance of the nature of the actual process. In this case, the thought form maintains a thin connection with the mind of the mentator, and darting here and there it attracts to itself the thought forms emanating from the minds of others, which may happen to contain the desired vibrations. It even reaches out to the presence of other mentators and absorbs the mentative vibrations emanating from them and literally steals their ideas if they have not properly guarded the same by their will. In this connection, I may call to your attention the well-known fact that persons thinking along the same lines, although in different parts of the world, are often brought in close rapport with each other in this way, as many people know by their own experience. In this case, the thought forms seem to act as a sort of mentative wire, conveying the vibrations from one mind to another. Very much akin to this last-mentioned kind of thought form is another which occurs in instances of direct telemental communication between persons. In this case, the thought form proceeds in a long straight line, from the one mind to the other, and then acts as a direct wire, conveying the mentative currents, or vibrations, from one to the other. There is another variety of thought form that spreads out in gradually widening sweeps, the thought form having a rotary motion. The sweeps are in a constantly widening circle, and reach out further and further each day, according to the impulse imparted to them by the mentator. But the most peculiar feature of this thought form is a strange movement towards its own center, by which it sucks in all that it attracts to its vortex. This phase is manifested by men of strong positivity whose enterprise and schemes are spread over large areas, and who set themselves up as centers of these mentative whirlpools, and draw to themselves all that come within the sweep of their influence. They make things come their way, in fact. I have described but a few of the manifold appearances and varieties of the thought forms that you see before you in the picture, but we shall consider a few more in detail as we proceed with the subject. In thinking of these thought forms, always picture them as having shape and form like any material substance, for by so doing you will better realize the nature of their workings. Some thought forms indeed are not only things, but become so infused by the intense desire and will of the mentator that they become almost like living forces. Such thought forms carry the characteristics of the mentator to such an extent, are infused with his nature to such a degree, that when they are felt they seem almost like the actual presence of the mentator himself, that is as if he were present urging his claims or statements in person. Such cases are of course rare, so far as conscious production is concerned. They may be good or bad. A strong desire on the part of a dying person has often caused an actual appearance by a loved one or friend, although the soul had not left the body. And in cases of dire distress or need, people often so draw upon those who care for them that the latter will send to them a powerful thought form of help, advice, and assistance. Trained occultists can do this voluntarily and consciously, but very few others have reached this stage.